the past couple of years, the Vancouver Canucks have been stuck on the bubble. Is 2025 finally going to be the year where they can break through and prove that they deserve to be considered one of the best teams in the league? This is the 2025-26 Deep Dive on the Vancouver Canucks. Hello and welcome to team number 19 on my preseason power rankings, the Vancouver Canucks. And as I said in the intro, Vancouver's in a weird spot, man. Like, in terms of the teams that missed the playoffs last year, like aside from the Rangers, they might have the lowest or the highest floor of the teams that missed the playoffs. But I just don't know how high the ceiling is on this team. And as we kind of break it down here, they're a fascinating team because they have a lot of pieces that I really like. Like Quinn Hughes is arguably the best defenseman in the NHL. If he's not number one, he's number two. Like Elias Pettersson, when at his best, is a really high end center. Brock Besser's a fun player. Connor Garland's great. The rest of the blue line is solid enough. Thatcher Demko is a big question mark, but when he was healthy, he looked like a top goalie in the NHL. So they have all these pieces that look nice. It's just about one, making sure that they can all come together at the same time, but also, and more importantly, maybe making sure that the direction that this team is in is consistent. And I feel like that's been the biggest issue that I've had with the Canucks over the last couple of years, is just like they've had trouble deciding if they wanted to go all in on this core, or if they or if they're gonna dip their toe in the water and maybe rebuild, because like we don't know what's happening with Quinn Hughes, we don't know what's happening with Elias Pettersson. They obviously re-signed Demko to a pretty high cap it on a decent term, but a high cap it, especially for a guy who hasn't really played in a while. They re-signed Brock Besser to a pretty much a max deal at the time. They re-signed Connor Garland, a guy who they've been talking about trading for the last 3 years. And it's led to this concoction of players that is like very unique in terms of what this team is trying to be. And when you re-sign a player like Connor Garland, for example, I think that's kind of the epitome of this. After basically wanting to trade him for the last 3 years and having him on the market, it tells me that you don't have a set plan as to what the idea is here. And again, I like a lot of what the Canucks have done. I think that their floor is actually really high. I think their floor is higher than a lot of playoff teams from last year's is. But I don't know how much higher their ceiling is compared to that. And this year is going to be a big indication of that, because last year's, I think, is about as bad as this team can get, which is a good thing because they were still, decent enough. But I just don't know. And I think the year before was like their ceiling. But again, come playoff time, it's a bit of a different beast. I'm curious to see what Vancouver Canucks we get this year, because I think we've kind of seen the tale of both ends of what this team can be. And because of the nature of how this team is built, it's not like they have, guys waiting around who are going to, jump onto the scene and become, superstar players out of nowhere, right? Like Philip Hedl's nice. Elias Pettersson obviously can bounce back. But, Quinn Hughes isn't going to suddenly become more of a top two defenseman, right? Like he's great. He's what he is, right? Like it's a weird team where I don't know if they're going to get a lot of growth in terms of actual development. But they could get growth in terms of health, first of all, and then just players getting back to where their peak has already been. And that's kind of what's going to determine what Vancouver Canucks we get. And as we look at the roster here, I think that's kind of exemplified in their grades, right? Like they're 18th in offense, 12th in defense, 22nd in goaltending, or 23rd in goaltending. 5th in special teams. I think their penalty kill especially is phenomenal. And then coaching culture is 25th, and a lot of that's just because of the unknowns of what the coaching staff's going to be. But again, you look around here, and the defense is slightly below the midpoint in the NHL. The offense is slightly below the midpoint. The defense is slightly above the midpoint. The goaltending is 23rd a lot because Thatcher Demko really hasn't played, and I don't know what to expect from him, and I don't expect Kevin Lankinen to be as good as he was last year. So a lot of that is just kind of regression based, and just the unknown of what Thatcher Demko is going to look like. Especially teams being fifth. Their power play, their first power play unit especially is solid, and their penalty kill is very good. So they grade high in that category. So overall, like it's a team I have 19th. Obviously, like it's pretty close to the top half of the league, and I think that's kind of their floor, right? Is I'm grading them more towards where they were last year than where their ceiling could be, and I think that's reasonable based on what we saw last season. So I don't like this isn't a team that's going to bottom out unless there's injuries, and it's a team that could easily make the playoffs, and it's a team that could probably win a round, but like pound for pound, like when I compare them to the teams even at the top of the Pacific, right, like the Edmontons and Vegases, I don't know if I'd pick them in a series against one of those teams. I don't know. I definitely wouldn't pick them to beat both on a playoff run, barring a Thatcher Demko Vezina season. And I think that's kind of the issue that I have with Vancouver overall is just the ceiling really isn't there, and there's nothing that they can really move in terms of assets unless it is like a Quinn Hughes or a Elias Pettersson that's going to improve them. And even as soon as you move one of those two guys, you're probably not you're not going to get the best player back in a trade when you're moving Quinn Hughes. So it's a really, really fascinating situation the Canucks are in right now, and I'm intrigued. They're one of the most intriguing teams for me, like in terms of like watchability. Just kind of seeing how this narrative plays out throughout the season is going to be fascinating to me, because I think they could either boom and finish as like a top 5 or 6 team in the NHL this year, and that wouldn't really surprise me, or they could and bottom out, maybe finish like 20th, 21st in the NHL. I don't think they'll be significantly worse than that without injuries, but they're a really fascinating team to me, and that's not necessarily me saying that I don't like them. I think they're fascinating. We jump into the coaching culture. Patrick Alvin has been okay, I guess. Like, he hasn't done anything that's like super offensive to me, but again, like I think it's just the total lack of direction that this team has. I haven't seen like a set game plan in terms of like we're clearly rebuilding or we're clearly going for it. It's very much like he's very reactionary as a GM. Instead of being proactive, he's very reactive, I find, and that's why I can't grade him much higher than this. Although like I don't think he's done anything like super egregious. It's very much like there's no like the plan changes. It fluctuates wildly based on like where the team's at in that current moment. Whereas a lot of the better GMs will like understand that their team's going to go through slumps or their team's going to go through highs and lows, and you kind of just stay the course. And to me, anyway, that's the mark of a better GM, is somebody who's confident in what they're doing, and it just doesn't seem like he's fully there yet. Not that I think he's bad. It's just I think he's been a little reactionary. And then obviously Adam Foote, like we just don't really know what he's going to look like as the full-time head coach. But so you get to see. That's kind of my general grade for them. I have them as a bubble team, and I think everybody is more or less going to have them as a bubble team, or at least like I can't see too many people disagreeing with that. That placement in terms of what they could be, because they were a bubble team last year, and there were some things that they were very good at and some things that they were not so good at. They were not very good at generating expected goals. They were slightly better at finishing those chances. Defensively, they were very good, and this is where I think this team could shine, right? If Thatcher Demko can come back and be a starting goaltender, being 5th in expected goals against, 18th in goals against, I think getting a true number one goaltender for as much as Kevin Lankinen was able to hold the fort down, probably about as good as you could expect from him. It really there was a big discrepancy between their goals for or goals against and expected goals against, and I think that could get cleared up with a healthy Thatcher Demko. But that's kind of the question, right? Like what is Thatcher Demko going to look like? Because we don't know at this point, and that's definitely a concern. The power play is fine. It's pretty much league average in terms of their scoring ability. I don't know what the regression is going to be like on that. Obviously, like not having JT Miller for the full year is going to be interesting. But they have Marcus Pettersson for the full year, who's likely going to be on the second unit. So it's going to be a year of continuity. And again, like a lot of that depends on Quinn Hughes being fully healthy, Elias Pettersson bouncing back. There's a lot of question marks depending on what the power play can look like. The penalty kill, I have a lot of faith in. It was second in the league last year in terms of its percentages, and it looks really good. I really like the players that are going to be probably populating their penalty kill. So overall, compared to last year, like I don't know how much different these results will be. I don't know if the offensive results are going to be much different. I expect them to generate more than the second worst expected goals in the league, but I don't know like how considerable of an upgrade that will be unless Elias Pettersson bounces back and becomes the point of game elite center that he was a couple years ago. But in terms of the defense, I do think that they'll be better in terms of goals against if Thatcher Demko's healthy. So there's a lot of question marks with this team, but I think I think that they project better defensively than they do on the offensive side. So jump into the forward core here, and it's a forward core that's super fascinating to me. There's a lot of really interesting pieces here. The most fascinating one is obviously the acquisition of Evander Kane, right? And they really did the Oilers a favor by giving the Oilers a pick for Evander Kane at zero salary retained, which was fascinating to me. And then the Oilers proceeded to not use that money at all. So hey, what can you do? But it's just there were so many better ways to spend that money. In my mind, right? And I've said this a couple times in these videos is that I'm not going to rip on a team unless there was a better option to do, right? And there were so many better options than trading an asset for Evander Kane, right? If they would have got Evander Kane and a 4th round pick from the Oilers to take on the salary, I would have been like, yeah, okay, fine, that fair enough. But you're getting a player here that hasn't played in a year aside from the playoffs, didn't look great in the playoffs that he did play in, and really hasn't looked great before that in the large sample size of the NHL season 2 years ago now. And to give up an asset for that to help out a division rival that you be possibly competing with for a playoff spot is just fascinating to me. I don't fully understand the idea behind that, but hey, I mean, that one was strange. Aside from that, though, there wasn't a whole lot of new faces on this team. Really, it's just kind of bringing guys back, right? They bring back Brock Besser, they bring back Connor Garland. Elias Pettersson's still on the team. I still really like him. Filipito's going to be there for a full season. I like Filipito. I don't know if I love him being the only true top 6 center they have left here, because I don't like Teddy Bluger and Ratty probably shouldn't be touching the top 6. So it's interesting. I think that the depth is definitely an issue. In terms of the third line especially, but I think you could put together a really strong fourth line. Kiefer Sherwood, I love. I'm a big Kiefer Sherwood guy. I'm going to talk about him in a bit. And there's a lot of guys on this team I really like, right? I'm a huge Nils Hoglander fan. Kiefer Sherwood, as I mentioned. Elias Pettersson, I've been a huge fan of forever. Filipito, I've been a fan of for a while. Teddy Bluger, I've been a fan of. Besser, Connor Garland. There's a lot of guys that I like on this team. I just don't know if the mix of the players is enough to consider this team a really strong playoff caliber team, and that's kind of the issue, right? Is that the Canucks are in this moment right now where they're trying to push for a playoff spot, and I just don't know if this is the mix to get them there. In terms of maybe it'll get them into the playoffs, but I don't know, just because of how weak the Pacific is, especially at that third spot. But it's more I don't know what the ceiling is on this forward core. We start with Elias Pettersson, who had a down season last year. Everybody's talked about it. The injury is definitely a big factor for that. And getting him back to full health is going to be, the biggest thing. Because last year, especially his offensive numbers really tanked. He had a lot of trouble generating offense. He was still very good, setting up players in higher danger areas. But he really just needs to get back to full health, right? Because a fully healthy Elias Pettersson is one of the best centers in the NHL, despite what I think a lot of people that don't watch Canucks games enough will tell you. He really does have that dynamic, elite playmaking. He can score at a pretty good rate. His puck carrying is really good. His puck handling is fantastic. He just needs to be healthy, right? That's the big thing, and he needs to be confident again, because he's somebody that, at least from what I've seen, if he's off his game, everything kind of drops. There's the confidence wavers fairly easily with him, and that would be something that I'd be a little bit concerned with. Going into the season, especially coming back from an injury, is getting him hot to start the year, and then I think like the first month and a half, 2 months is really going to tell you what Elias Pettersson's going to look like throughout the whole season. But there's still some things last year that he did really good, right? Like he still had a ton of defensive puck touches. His retrievals were really good. He was still able to get out of the zone pretty consistently. His zone entries were pretty good. He had a lot of entries that led to chances, and those little things still being there really tell you a lot about just how good like Elias Pettersson can be, right? Because he still has those little small parts of his game that people might not notice, but they're still there despite the fact that he was struggling, and it was definitely a tough season for him. So the fact that you're still seeing those positives come out of his game really gives me hope that we're going to see, if we see a fully healthy Elias Pettersson, that he'll be back to being one of the best young centers in the NHL. And I really hope he is, because if he's playing at the top of his game, he is extremely fun. And if you haven't watched enough Canucks games and you haven't really you've been following the series, I know there's some people who might only watch like their favorite team, but if you're somebody who's been following the series from the jump, Elias Pettersson rocks. And when he's on his game, he's so much fun. So I really hope he gets there, and hopefully he's able to really showcase that, especially like this close to a big point in his career too. So it'd be very important for the Canucks for him to be healthy, and that's kind of the crux of this offense, because behind him like the center core isn't great. Brock Boeser is another guy that had a bit of a down year last year, and I think part of that is because of what we saw from Pettersson, and just the two of them. If one of them's off, then it's kind of hard for the other to get going, because there's no real true like center on that line. And so I think having Pettersson back to being a high end player is going to help Boeser. I mean, his expected numbers were still very good last year. He was still generating a decent amount of chances. He just wasn't able to finish as consistently. And like a lot of that has to do with the movement around. Like obviously JT Miller was gone at part of the season. That was a pretty substantial loss to what the offense does. So I think just consistency here for Boeser. And I mean there's a contract coming up and stuff too. So I think being locked in, knowing where he's going to be now for basically the rest of his career, it could help in terms of the mental side of that, because some players thrive in a contract year and some don't. And I'm excited to see if Boeser can kind of bounce back into that. He's 29. I still don't really have a lot of issues in terms of like the age curve for him. But in terms of still being a productive offensive player, he can still definitely do that. His power play numbers are pretty solid. It's just more about making sure that you can kind of get the best out of what Brock Boeser is going to bring, and he can be a really strong top line winger at his best. And I think again, I think a fully healthy, fully engaged Elias Pettersson is going to do a lot for what Brock Boeser can do. Connor Garland's another guy who's re-signed. He signed an extension this summer, and I love Connor Garland, man. Like I made a post. Like if you follow me on Instagram, I have a post from like 3 or 4 years ago about Connor Garland. The year before he had a really strong season in Arizona, and I've been a fan of him forever. And I was like, I think he was the fact that he was in trade rumors as long as he was, I thought was just insane, and the fact that nobody really pulled the trigger on it. So I don't know if Vancouver just wasn't serious about moving him. Clearly, they want him around. They just re-signed him. But Connor Garland just does he's such a Swiss Army knife player, and he's fantastic defensively, a great defensive winger. But he also can generate offense really well. He's super good in transition. He's able to drive play, especially as a winger, on a line, and as a middle six winger, that's even more impressive, because a lot of them rely on that, having a good center, for instance, leading those lines, and he's able to generate his own offense. The finishing is fine, the goals are fine, but it's the passing that's really good. He generates a ton of primary assists. He generates a ton of his own offense, and having all those things kind of come together into a player like this that's super effective 5-on-5 is so useful. And I've loved Connor Garland for a long time, and I'm happy that he's still in Vancouver. I think this is a fun team for him to be a part of. But he was definitely somebody that I was whoever was going to get their hands on Connor Garland was going to be very happy, and obviously the Canucks are, and they brought him back. But but look for him to take, maybe a more elevated role in the lineup now that he's re-signed, and they kind of know that maybe he'll, almost slot into, more of a consistent top six role instead of, the middle six role that he's been kind of bouncing in and out of the last couple of years. Jake DeBrusk, another guy. I didn't like the Jake DeBrusk signing when they brought him in. I'm going to be completely honest. But he had a really strong year last year. I was impressed with what we saw out of him. I was worried that, losing Lindholm and replacing him with DeBrusk was kind of a net negative move. But clearly, Elias Lindholm was awful last season, and Jake DeBrusk had a really strong season. And I don't think people really talked about it. His power play numbers were really solid. He generated a ton of offense on the power play, even if the counting stats didn't back that up. But in terms of his generated offense, he was very, very strong. His defense is pretty league average. But, as a middle six winger, I don't know how much more you can really expect from him, especially when he's able to generate offense the way that he is. And he's such a different player to what the Canucks have, and I think that's why he's fascinating in this lineup, because he brings, a different side to the game that Vancouver doesn't have. And that was one of the criticisms that people had of the Canucks, in the playoffs a couple years ago. And Jake is a really intriguing, middle six option, because he's somebody that can bounce around the lineup too. That's what him and Garland both have in common. They're completely different players, but they can both, if you need them to play top 6 minutes, they can do that. If you need them to play third line, fourth line minutes, they can do that too. They're super versatile players, and although DeBrusk's defense isn't nearly as good as Garland's is, he can still play more of a physical game. He can disrupt play, and if you can pair him with the right players, that's enough to kind of get by in more of a defensive role. But DeBrusk is somebody that if you can kind of just do what he did last year, and everybody else can, the players that we've talked about can step up and, improve, get back to where they should be. Jake DeBrusk could be a super, big X factor on a Canucks playoff appearance for sure, because getting that secondary scoring, having that guy who can, be an energy guy, on a line maybe with more defensive players, is going to be super valuable to what the Canucks want to do. He really surprised me. I was wrong about Jake DeBrusk last year. I thought he was going to be okay, but he had a very, very strong season, and hopefully he can do it again, because it was fun. It was a very pleasant surprise for me to see that out of DeBrusk, because I don't think we saw that consistency out of him in Boston, and he looked a lot more comfortable playing in Vancouver. Nils Hoglander, as I said, is another player that I really like, who had, a bit of a down season last year too, add him to the club. But somebody who still just has, and his transition game is phenomenal, right? He's very, I don't want to say he's similar to I hate doing player comparisons, but he has that elite transition ability that I think really fits well with what the Canucks want to do offensively. The problem is they just weren't, they were in such a flux of the roster last season that he wasn't able to fully, be utilized properly, because he was bouncing around the lineup so much. And I think, getting him in a spot where he can be comfortable and he can be just the big play driver here that can set up, shot opportunities, can create passing lanes. It is where he's going to be utilized the most, right? His exits with possession are super high. His exits off puck retrievals are super high. Now his exits don't lead to a ton of chances. He's pretty much above league average in that sense. But again, I keep harping on, but a healthy team around him should help in helping generate those chances, right? Because if you can have Nils Hoglander being the elite puck retrieval player, and then you can have him getting the puck up to guys like Pettersson and Besser, or even a Garland or DeBrusk kind of type player, it will create more offense for the Canucks. And I think a lot of the Canucks offense is going to be built in the defensive zone and exiting the defensive zone, because both offensively and defensively they have players who are really good on it, right? Obviously Quinn Hughes is one of the best, but even guys like Marcus Pettersson can do that too. So I think a lot of the Canucks offense is going to be built on that transition, moving up into the offensive zone, and guys like Nils Hoglander are really good at that. They're very toolsy players in that sense, right? They're very gadget players in terms of what they can do. So Nils Hoglander isn't going to work in every system, but in terms of what the Canucks need and the way they should be trying to generate offense, based on the skill sets of their players, he could have a really strong season if everything kind of comes together for Vancouver. Evander Kane, man. It's time to talk about Evander Kane. And it's safe to say I don't like this move. I don't like, we talked about the elite transition guys and, how Vancouver wants to generate offense. Evander Kane just doesn't do that. Like, his transition game just isn't what it was when, he wasn't 33 years old coming off an injury. His defensive game is awful. There's not a lot that and if you're watching this on YouTube, by the way, the chart that's up is for not last year but the year before, because he didn't play last year. And going into his age 34 season, I don't know how much is left in the tank for Evander Kane. Can he help on the power play? Yeah, maybe, right? Like, sure, if that's the idea, but like, to give up an asset and help out a division rival by taking on $5 million in cap hit just kind of seems insane to me. Especially for a team that you're going to see in the playoffs, if you do make the playoffs, it's interesting, and I don't know what the value was, what the Canucks saw in terms of value here, because like the value must be overwhelming, right? To give up an asset and help out a division rival, to do so is tough. Like, they must love something about Evander Kane's game that I just haven't seen. And it better not just be like the leadership of going to back-to-back Stanley Cup finals and losing. Like, that's not good enough for me. Sorry, it's not. So like, I'm fascinated by what they must have seen in him that they love. I'd be curious to know, but I don't know. I don't see a lot of value in him. If they would have, like I said, if they would have got like a 3rd round pick back with him, sure, like whatever, I'm not going to be mad about that. But especially for a team that's trying to push for a playoff spot, there's so many better ways you could have spent $5 million. You could have got yourself 2 players, to shore up, get yourself a 3rd pair defenseman who's fun. And Victor Olofsson just signed. I think Victor Olofsson would have been a far better addition to what this team was trying to do than Evander Kane was, and he signed for a lot less than $5 million. So yeah, just again, like I'm not gonna rip on a team for doing something in the offseason if there wasn't a better option, but in this case, like I think there were significantly better options than moving out an asset, albeit a mid-round pick, but for a guy who really doesn't bring much value. Filipino. First of all, a lot of people say I look like Filipino. That's just kind of been a running joke if you've been around. I don't see it, but hey, I mean, whatever. But we're Filipino fans here because of that. Obviously 26 years old, going to his age 26 season. Still 2 years left at a very solid cap hit. His ability to create offense is exceptional. He's a very, very good playmaker. He's one of the best playmakers in the league, probably, honestly. He doesn't get talked about a lot for it. Defensive numbers are definitely lacking. But if you can get him, in a second line, role, get him a shooter. Maybe this is where you can get something out of Evander Kane, right? If Evander Kane wants to be your spot up shooter, throw Hedel and Garland on a line, and just have Connor Garland as your defensive forward on that line, and just let Hedel and Kane be your offense. I guess is like the situation, but again, like I don't know who the fit's going to be with Filipino. And that's not his fault. Like, I like him. I just don't think Vancouver went out and got a winger that's like good enough or fits Filipino's style enough to play with. And I don't know if that's Evander Kane. It might be if Evander Kane's going to be a spot up shooter and Filipino's going to be the playmaker on that. Sure. But I have concerns about that fit. I think that Filipino definitely can be a second line center. He's shown flashes of it. He showed flashes of it in the playoffs with the Rangers a couple years ago. And, giving him that full-time spot as the 2C here is going to be fascinating. I'm really interested to see how Filipino does that, because I don't think the situation is, like, super ideal. But it's good enough that, like, if he is going to be a true second-line center, he should be good enough to play that role. And that's another thing that's really going to kind of sinker some of this team, because if Elias Pettersson is having a bad year again, then their center core is kind of in trouble unless Filipino just completely pops off. But if Elias Pettersson can be a really strong 1C. I think Filipino should have the toolkit to become a true number 2C on that team, and then you can kind of build that lineup behind that, with Ratty and Bluger and however else you want to build the center core. So that's kind of my thing. Like I think he should be good in that role, but there's really no safety net behind him in case he isn't. And that's a little bit of a concern, but I'm not super concerned in Filipino flopping. I'm more concerned in Elias Pettersson not getting back to his same level, and then it doesn't really matter who your 3C is at that point because you're kind of in trouble. I finally want to talk about Kiefer Sherwood, man, and I said it in the intro, like when I started the conversation about the wingers or the forwards here, and I love Kiefer Sherwood. He's so much fun. He's so underrated. And just his ability, his offensive ability is so good. He's really good at like everything. He creates a ton of chances. Himself creates a ton of assists off chances. He has a ton of contributions. Shoots the puck a lot. In terms of his offensive driving, it's pretty good. Like he's pretty good everywhere, right? He can cycle the puck. He's good off rushes. He generates a ton of rebounds. This is somebody who just. He loves creating his rebound chances, and when you have a team like with guys like the Canucks do, you can generate a lot of goals off those, right? So the Canucks are kind of built to be that style of team. His zone entry ability is fantastic. Entering the puck with the zone, his exits are very good as well. He's also very good at pressuring the puck on zone stoppages. And there's so many parts of his game that I think are super underrated and don't get talked about, and I'm here to talk about them because Kiefer Sherwood's awesome, and I'm such a fan. A lot of people gave a lot of hype to Dakota Joshua and were very sad that he left. Don't be. Kiefer Sherwood was the better bottom six forward on this team. He rocks. There's not really a lot of holes in his game, and the things that are holes in his game. Can be solved with a lot of the other guys on this team, right? Like his exits with possession are pretty low. His control entries are pretty low. But like as we talked about with the rest of the Canucks here, like that's not really that's like a strength of the team. So like everything that he does well is stuff that like either the Canucks like could use more of. Let's say, not necessarily that they're lacking, but you could use more of. And the things that he struggles in are what like the rest of this team is good at. So it's really not like that big. Like Kiefer Sherwood's fun, man. If you're watching a Canucks fan, watch for Kiefer Sherwood because he's great and he doesn't get talked about. And I want to give him more recognition. So please send some love to Kiefer Sherwood because he's awesome. I love him. This blue line is solid, man. I think that the bottom pair leaves a lot to be desired. The bottom two defensemen with Tyler Myers and P.O. Joseph are like my actual bottom two defensemen, despite the fact that Derek Forwart's listed as their third pair defenseman on Puckpedia. But the top three on this team are really good. Obviously, I mean Quinn Hughes is amazing. As we talked about, he's arguably the best defenseman in the NHL. He's unbelievable. His offensive ability is fantastic. His defensive ability is far better than people give him credit for, and we'll jump into that. Filip Hronek is a solid pairing for Quinn Hughes. I think he's limited, but for what he can bring to this team, he fits with Quinn Hughes very well. And I liked the pickup when they made it. I thought it was like weird timing when they did it, but I was pretty confident that the pair was going to work pretty well, just based on their styles matching, and it has. And Marcus Pettersson again, like another guy who was brought in as part of this like weird, we don't really know what we want to do this year thing in Vancouver, where you trade JT Miller, you bring in Marcus Pettersson. Just sure. I think they might have paid a little bit too much for Marcus Pettersson, but he is also very underrated. Like just so good offensively. Defensively he's very good. He's a very strong two-way defenseman. And as the third defenseman on this team is perfect for that role. Derek Forbort defensively, he's kind of your super low event, nothing's gonna happen on the ice kind of player. And then Tyler Myers and P.O. Joseph. I would have liked to see them, maybe spend that $5 million on a fourth defenseman on this team, and then like this blue line would look so much better if it was Hughes, Hronek, Pettersson, insert second pair defenseman here, and then Myers and Forbort as your 5-6. I think this team would look significantly better, and this would easily be a top 10 blue line in the league. It might still be, but I think just the lack of depth at the bottom of it hurts it for me. But in terms of the top of this blue line, it's very, very good. And we start with Quinn Hughes, man, and like, what can this guy do? Like, seriously, what can't he do? He is so good everywhere across the ice, right? Like his shots are near the top of the league. His shot assists are near the top of the league. His primary contributions on chances are near the top of the league. His passes from the center lane are top of the league. He creates a ton of high danger assists. His one-timer assists are near the top of the league. He's one of the best, if not the best, cycle and forecheck defenseman in the league. His rush offense is very good. He enters the zone maybe better than any other defenseman in the league outside of Cale Makar. His controlled zone entries are fantastic. His entries leading to chances are near the top of the league. It's like it's crazy, right? You talk about puck retrievals leading to exits in the defensive zone are fantastic. Now he doesn't have a ton of retrievals per 60, but his retrievals leading to exits are near the top of the league, which means every time he touches the puck, it's getting out of the zone. Basically, his exits per 60 are fantastic. His successful exits per 60 are fantastic. His exits per possession per 60 is near the top of the league, and it's just Quinn Hughes is like, if you could build a defenseman in a lab for today's NHL, it looks like Quinn Hughes because he does everything that teams value right now, basically better than anybody else. And this isn't the place that I want to have the who's better, Cale Makar or Quinn Hughes argument. It's not. It doesn't matter. They're both phenomenal defensemen. They both do things different than each other that are really, really effective. But like, man, Quinn Hughes is like, the fact that he's so good on both ends of the ice and doesn't really get talked about defensively at all. And like, he's not like a complete top of the line like prime Nicholas Hjalmarsson shutdown defenseman, but he really, really is just if you talk about 5-tool players, Quinn Hughes is number one on the list. He is phenomenal at being that type of player, and I can't talk. I mean, Quinn Hughes would work in any system. He obviously works in Vancouver really well, clearly, and Vancouver should do whatever they can to make sure that he's a Canuck for life. And if he isn't, I know another team that would absolutely love to have him, and he'd absolutely fit on, and would be really fun to watch too. So, but obviously Canucks fans should absolutely want to throw heaven and earth at this man to keep him as a Canuck for life, and as they should, because he might be the best defenseman in the NHL, and he's so much fun to watch. Like, there's not much else to say about Quinn Hughes. He's awesome, and he's really good at like everything, and treasure being able to watch a player like this. Filip Hronek, his defensive partner, is again like Filip Hronek is kind of like he's like the very, very, very cheap Timu version of what Quinn Hughes can do, because he does a lot of the same things as Quinn Hughes, but just on like such a astronomically lower level that but it's fine because like he's playing alongside a guy that he matches really well with, right? But like Filip Hronek's really good at generating primary assists. His finishing isn't great, so I guess Quinn Hughes has that on him. But his power play numbers are fine. They're pretty mediocre. His penalty kill numbers are pretty mediocre. His strength is definitely his offense, but he pairs really well with what Quinn Hughes does. But it's not in the way that like Mark Mathot was just kind of like the defensive anchor for Erik Karlsson. It's very much a complimentary like Devin Taves to Cale Makar way, where he just kind of like he complements Quinn Hughes in the things that Hughes doesn't do well, which isn't very many. But then they can kind of make up for each other. I think he's a very, very good fit in terms of what the Canucks want to do. Now, I think he might be a little bit overpaid. 7.3 mils. Maybe not, because he's definitely worth 7.3, a lot more than Ivan Provorov is. So it's not an albatross contract, but it's definitely a little bit more than I would have paid for him. Because if he's not playing with Quinn Hughes in this role, he's probably closer to being a fourth defenseman on a team, a third or fourth defenseman at least. being closer to third defenseman. But in terms of what he brings to the team, it works fantastically with what Quinn Hughes tries to do. And when they're both able to go and be healthy, more so Hughes, it's so much fun. And Phil Pronik doesn't get a lot of credit for that. But I like the fit when they brought him in. And it's worked out so far when they're both going 100%. Marcus Pettersson was a guy they traded for. Again, like another player that I really like. The Canucks just love getting guys that that I'm a fan of, and Marcus Pettersson's another one of those. Again, just a really, really good offensive generator. His finishing ability is fantastic. He was really good at it last year, especially. So there might be a little bit of regression in terms of his point totals and stuff. But obviously he won't be like Quinn Hughes going to take some of the offensive opportunities away from him too for the full year. But as a second pair defenseman, as your like anchor on the second unit, Marcus Pettersson's like perfect for that role, and I liked the fit when it happened. It was just strange because they did pay a lot for him, and it was at a point where the team was kind of in flux, and then the JT Miller trade happened. It was just lack of direction, as I mentioned earlier. Kind of taking one step forward, two steps back, kind of thing. But in terms of like what he can bring to this team, overall, like Marcus Pettersson's fun. And he's good. He's good for the role. And I think as a top three, you look at this top three, and whether you want to say Pettersson's the second defenseman on this team, and I'd probably it's whatever. It doesn't matter. But you look at that top three, and it's a very, very solid top three, and it's just the concern comes with everything behind it, right? And I want to touch a little bit on Tyler Myers, because he is kind of the opposite of Quinn Hughes, where he's not very good at a lot of things. And the fact that they re-signed Tyler Myers is just baffling to me. I thought it would be the perfect opportunity just to move on. And it's like, and again, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, well, he's not going to hurt the team, but it's like, well, he's not going to help the team either. And if the idea is you're just going to get bodies on your team that aren't going to completely tank your chances of winning, then you're probably not that serious about being, a true playoff team and a true contender. And it's similar to the Evander Kane thing, right? Where it's like, I don't see why, like, what the need was to keep him around. Because clearly, like, it's not going to be there, right? Like, the body type is fun, and he's a unicorn in that sense, but like, it's not going to work out. He's not going to suddenly become, a top four defenseman that he was for a little bit. There's a brief window where he was good. But it's kind of over. I don't love the fact that he's arguably their fourth at worst fifth best defenseman, and that's kind of where I start taking this team a little less serious, right? Like, I think the offense lacks a lot of that secondary scoring punch up top, and the blue line just lacks depth. And Tyler Myers being an everyday player scares me a little bit. And even as good as the top three is on this team, it does scare me a little bit that this is kind of the next option behind that. And finally, Derek Forbort, who, like I said, is very much your low event, nothing's going to happen while he's on the ice player, right? Like, this is a guy who really, really took a big step defensively, in 2023-24, after basically being unplayable on both ends of the ice. But he granted, I'll give him credit, he was able to kind of redevelop his game and reinvent himself as, a pure defensive defenseman. And I don't have a problem with Derek Forbort being like your third pair defenseman who's going to go out and nothing's going to happen when he's on the ice. He's not going to generate any offense, but he's not going to allow any offense. He just kind of eat minutes for you. His penalty kill numbers are phenomenal. So even if you just have him for that, it will help the team out. So I don't have issues in that sense, but it's just like he's there. He's not going to win any awards for helping the team generate offense and win games necessarily. But in terms of like what he brings in his role as like a pure shutdown defenseman, he can eat those big minutes, which allows guys like your Quinn Hughes to play more offensively, and overall that's going to help the team, right? So maybe he's not the one generating the offense, but allowing your top players to be more dynamic will help the team win games. So I don't really have a problem with Derek Forbort, and obviously he's there. He's got a pretty team friendly contract. Pretty good in the shutdown, pure defensive role, and fits what they want to do. I just, like I said, I would have liked for them to bring in, one more defenseman, and they just haven't. finally, we talk about the goalies, and this is definitely the biggest question mark on this team for me, because Kevin Lankinen, like I said, did about as good as you could expect in the role that he was placed in as the starter. But Thatcher Demko is going to be what this team lives and dies by. And, if you look at Demko's numbers from the year that he played, in 23-24, he did perform, higher than what the team than what he was expected to. Both, in the, on the power play, or on the penalty kill rather, and, on especially 5-on-5. And it's just going to be a question of whether he's fully healthy. And if he is, then they're fine. And they have a starting goalie, and Kevin Lankinen is a fantastic backup. If they aren't, it doesn't really matter who their third. Everybody's mad that they traded, their third string goalie, but it's like it doesn't really matter, because if Demko can't play, then it doesn't. It's not gonna make much of a difference who their backup is at that point. But I think if you can run Demko and Kevin Lankinen can play, if you need him to play 35, 40 games, he can do that because he did it last year and he did it at a competent enough level. So if you want to ease Demko back in, which should be the plan, they're totally free to do that, and they have the flexibility to do that. And I think that's what's going to make, the return for Thatcher Demko a lot easier, because they have that guy who they can rely on to play, 35 games a year. And I think that's definitely going to help the Canucks long term in terms of what this goaltending can be. But again, Demko's a huge question mark because we haven't seen him play in a year. I hope that he's come back because, again, super fun goalie when he was at the peak of his game. Finally, we touched on the special teams, and like I said, I really like the top unit. I think the top unit on the power play is so much fun, obviously led by Quinn Hughes on that blue line. But, even somebody like Elias Pettersson last year, despite his struggles, still put up some pretty good power play numbers. Jake DeBrusk is really strong on the power play. Brock Besser's fun there, too. But it's really the penalty kill here. Drew O'Connor's fantastic penalty killer. Marcus Pettersson's great in that role. Thatcher Demko's penalty kill numbers were really strong when he was playing, obviously. Kevin Lankinen's penalty kill numbers last year were phenomenal, too. But even the second unit, Kiefer Sherwood, who I talked about, Derek Forbort, phenomenal penalty killer. So they really have a lot that they can do on the penalty kill, and you saw the results last year; they were really strong. I think they get better now that you have, a Thatcher Demko there. So you have two goalies that are very strong on the penalty kill as well. I can't see their penalty kill taking a big fall off unless there's injuries or just huge regression. But the special teams unit, the power play is gonna be fine. It should hover around, hopefully above the league average, but the penalty kill is going to be what really carries the special teams unit into being, one of the best in the league. So there you have it. That is the Vancouver Canucks. Like I said multiple times on this video, the Canucks are so much fun. They're a really fascinating team for me because I think that their floor is good enough that they should be a bubble team, and their ceiling is interesting because I don't know how high this team can go with the core that they have. The blue line has enough issues that, they're an injury away from the blue line being kind of a disaster, and they're especially, an injury away from the offense being a disaster, but they're also even a bounce back season, or not having a bounce back season from Elias Pettersson away from the offense being a bit of an issue. And then, of course, Thatcher Demko is a huge question mark. So for me, the Canucks are just kind of filled with questions. But I still don't think that their floor is super low. So they're a fun team. Let me know what you think of the Canucks. Do you think the Canucks are going to be in the playoffs? That's an interesting question. I don't even know yet. I haven't made my official predictions yet. Those will be coming out right after the series is over. Once we get through the preseason and stuff, it'll be out before then. It'll be on Instagram though, so go follow the Instagram links in the description. But thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like. Make sure you subscribe for the rest of the videos. We have 18 more of these to go. We're almost halfway done. Thank you for supporting the series. It takes, like I said in the last video, a ton of work and a ton of effort and time. So and likes, comments are very much appreciated. Share it with your friends, and we'll see you in the next video.